and welcome to another episode of Unturned Stones. For today's episode, my guest is Jay Carpenter. Jay
Howdy.
is my cousin-in-law. He is my wife's cousin through her dad's side. So I've known him for.
This is complicated.
Does that sound?
Yeah,
more
that's.
complicated?
I think it sounds correct, but yeah,
It was correct, but it sounded worse than it needed to sound.
yeah.
But so I've known Jay for a few years now, and Jay is currently working with kids with mental health. He's had some real world experience as he's pursuing his degree in psychology for postgrad. So just to start out the podcast, can you kind of talk about yourself a little bit, talk about maybe some of your experience right now currently with work, as well as a little bit about your childhood and family life?
Sure. Right now, I am a registered behavior technician. So I work with autistic children. We do ABA therapy, which is like just a branch of behaviorism that still exists. So it's not overly concerned with, what someone's thinking, just about what they're doing, which, you always end up incorporating what they're thinking. But it works pretty well with kids because they don't necessarily think through that, oh, I know you're trying to trick me into doing the right thing. But I've been doing that for about 2.5 years now. And I'm currently going to grad school for clinical mental health. So that will let me get a licensed professional counselor certification, and then I'll be able to work with people. That's the goal.
Yeah.
So still kind of at the beginning end of that grad program. I did a bunch of shifts in my career. So, I've got a psych undergrad, but I also have English and computer science, which I did first. But that's a particularly soul-crushing career. Both of them, really. So, I kind of shifted into something that both feels meaningful and you can make money off of it as well.
Okay, so you kind of you had a journey that developed into this eventually that got to you here.
Oh, yeah.
So we'll kind of have to, we'll touch on what made you choose to end up your journey on this path here. So,
yeah.
So your childhood and family life, you kind of talk about where you grew up, maybe a little bit more about your mom and dad, your brother.
Yeah. So I was born in Florida, but I grew up here in Wisconsin.
Where in Florida were you born?
I think Coral Springs.
Okay.
I spent all of a week there, so it's not the most
not long
thing.
Okay.
Yeah. I spent probably a month in a preemie ward, but once they decided I wasn't gonna die there, they were like, okay, get out, and we went back to Wisconsin. But I grew up in the Fox Point suburbs, and I suppose technically I grew up in Grafton, but most of my childhood was spent in Fox Point. And let's see. When it comes to family, my dad works from home. He does a lot of stock market stuff. My mom was a realtor when I was a little kid, and then she shifted into doing training development. So right now she works for an insurance company. So there's a lot of rants every time I talk to her about work, because she was much happier being a contractor. She's not happy being a wage slave. And my little brother is an artist, where he's got a YouTube channel. Who knows? Maybe we can throw a link in below the video.
Yeah.
But we're not marketing for him right now. But
nor do I have the followers to be marketing.
Well, yeah. Who knows? Maybe we should throw the link on his videos.
Yeah.
But he does miniature artwork and a lot of 3D printing. He's a very, very skilled guy. He's kind of done the exact same thing I have, where we just have a bunch of skills. He's done computer science, digital art, 3D printing. He's worked on a video game. He's got a bunch of different things he's doing, and it's nice that he's finally kind of getting some following. But we grew up, growing up, I would not have been able to tell you if my family was poor or not, which obviously the answer to that question. But I was going to University School of Milwaukee when I was a kid. And there's people there from multi-million-dollar companies, and you've got, that guy's, last name is Canon. Oh yeah, no, his family owns Canon cameras. they're very wealthy. When you're hanging out with people, you're going to big mansions, and my family are a little bit of pack rats, and so you go home and it's like, yeah, we're not part of this social class. So I grew up thinking I was poor back then. And then we went to Brookfield Academy for like middle school, and then you've got families that are doctors on both sides. And so I was like, yep, no, we're still poor. And then I finally got to college, and I was like, oh, okay, we're actually like doing pretty goddamn well. So it very much was, I would say, eye-opening, but at the same time, probably good to have had somewhat of a humble thought process about yourself.
Okay, so do you feel like that misunderstanding there, if like you didn't know where your family was fiscally when like growing up,
Yeah.
Did that come from like was there like a lack of communication of like maybe openness with your parents about stuff? You know, did they kind of keep you in a bubble of your children? You don't hear about anything else besides what?
I would say partly that, and also that my dad does investment stuff. So it's like, how much money do we have? Well, the stock market's down. And, you know, I distinctly remember him saying immediately after the trade towers went down, you know, Jay, the best time to buy is when there's blood on the streets. And I was like sitting there, and there was a period there afterwards where we were eating ramen unironically, because it was just like, okay, we sunk everything into the market while it is down, and we are just going to hope that nothing like blows up in the meantime. So like there were times where we very much were like paying attention to everything we were eating, and there were other times where it's, you know, you can do whatever you want. I mean, combined with the fact that my dad would never ask our grandfather for help ever.
Yeah.
Never going to happen. So you know, we had a lot of different experiences growing up, whether or not, you know, we were doing well or poorly, and it was always ambiguous. It wasn't something that they wanted to talk to us about. And then you go to school, and if anyone's ever gone by university school, I recommend it, because it looks like someone took a little bit of like Marquette's campus and stuffed it on a little backwoods road, except it's nicer. And it's like, okay, right, you know, you go there and you could be somebody who has, you know, $20 million to your name, and you'd still be going, oh man, I'm pretty poor compared to all these people. So it, you know, I just kind of stopped worrying about it to a degree. It was just like, I don't know, I'll figure it out at some point.
So do you feel like do you have a lot of fun memories of being a kid?
I mean, I was a pretty...
Because it almost sounds like you were very aware as a kid. You kind of paid attention to a lot.
Yeah, like I was a pretty shy kid. So like less so then. We changed schools, and then, you know, lost most of my original friend group. So a little bit shyer after that. But starting out, like, I wasn't the most social person, but I spent a lot of time just paying attention to people. And it was very interesting to like just pay attention to people and all the, I don't know, people like vying for social positioning. I've always been somebody where it's like, Jay, do you want to do this? And I'm like, no, everyone else is doing it. Okay.
So does that kind of make you, like when you notice people vying for that social positioning, did it make you like want to push away from vying for that social positioning more? Or are you saying like you kind of just felt like that was already so ingrained in you that when you notice people vying for social positioning, you were just so distinctly aware that like, wow, I never had that desire?
So I think a lot of that, and not having the desire, I think is a major aspect of it. Because when I think of the way my dad relates to people, very much he's the kind of person who's always polite, always respectful, and he doesn't really care. Like if you sit there and you walk away from that and you don't like him, he's going to go home and sleep just fine. And if you're sitting there like trying to play social games, he's not going to care. Like he's just going to be like, okay, well, this is what I did. Everything that I'm actually using to like show that I've done stuff is purely objective. So you can't really say, no, you didn't do that. And is just not going to be professional the entire time, just kind of bludgeoning through it. So it's kind of how I've always taken to it. It's like, am I popular? Am I trying to, you know, improve my social position? I mean, if I'm going to do that, it's going to be because I sit there and I'm like, you know what? You're a good person and I could introduce you to somebody else. It's not, oh, I'm going to start trying to make myself look better. It's like, all right, here's something I can do for you. And I'm doing this because I think you're valuable, that sort of thing.
So do you feel like, I feel like a lot of times people will, if people don't care about social positioning or if they care, they really care about their social status.
Yeah.
A lot of times that can be so tied in with self-esteem. So would you say you didn't ever have self-esteem issues then, since you never really felt like you were vying for other people's attention or for people to give you recognition for something because you possibly had enough self-esteem that you didn't desire that? Or would you say there was something else about that?
See, I would say it's almost the opposite, at least at first.
Okay.
Because like my little brother needed a lot more help growing up. Like I was always good at school. You just kind of leave me be and I'll do fine.
Very independent.
Except for math. But it's, which I regret because I feel like I probably would have ended up being an engineer. I'd be really happy doing that if I had just liked math. Apart from math, good at school. But, Ty always struggled a little bit more. So I just got very used to that. Whenever I did poorly, it was a problem that was worth, addressing. Whenever I did well, it was expected. So, just don't worry about it. Whereas there was always a lot of fussing over him, which, looking back, I can see, okay, they probably fussed over me a lot too. But definitely was very obvious when they were fussing over him. So I just kind of got used to that idea of just like, all right, that's kind of something other people do. I just need to make sure that I do the best I can at all times, because that's the baseline. While everyone else is off doing this, it's like, all right, but I'm still going to be getting above a 90 on everything that I do.
So like, would you like, so you had enough confidence, you had like enough like self-confidence as a kid?
When it comes to things like that,
So you kind of compartmentalize your confidence
Yeah.
and what aspect it was being applied to.
oh yeah.
Okay.
Like when it comes to social stuff, like I don't know of anybody in my family who has a large social group. So when it comes to like making friends, dealing with that, I was better before I changed schools. And then afterwards it was like, all right, I made all these friends when I was like in second grade. How did I do that again? And so I had a couple friends, but I never really, and it was like a 40-minute drive to get to that school. So I was like, I'm not really going to bother to hang out with a whole bunch of people after school because it's just a pain to drive all the way out there. And I get really car sick when I'm not the one driving. So I was just like, it's fine. So I wasn't very social really throughout all of like middle and high school. If there's any place where like I don't have a bunch of confidence, that's probably there, which is a weird thing to then decide, I'm going to be a therapist, when it's like social skills are like the big thing.
I don't necessarily think the two has to correlate.
Well, yeah, that's kind of why I was like, I like this, because it's very different when it's one-on-one. Like, throw me in a room with 5 people, and I'm probably going to talk significantly less, or I'm comfortable with everyone, and you're going to want me to shut up. But and mostly, I would say that if there's an area where like academic tasks, I'm really good at. That's one of those things where I know I've got that. When it comes to like being hardworking, things like that, yeah, no, I can do that. That's the grind is one of the things that was like, no, you do that. When it comes to maybe planning out the course for my life or social interaction, a little bit less confident with that.
Okay.
But that's also in large part because my parents are very much the kind of people who are like, you can do whatever you want. You can do whatever you want. You want to start a business? We can probably like figure out how to like help you fund that, or introduce you to the people who could, help you fund that. You want to, bring a girlfriend home. It's okay if her parents call. We'll say that you're still here. You guys can go out on a walk if you want. And I was like, fuck you, mom and dad. I'm going to stay at home and play video games. But it's very much, given there was never anything like pushing me towards a particular thing, never any restraints on that it I mean, that's why I've got an English and computer science degree that I do not use. Because it was like, I got to college, it was expected for me to go to college, and it was like, what do I want to do here? You can do anything you want. So I picked two things that I was good at.
But yeah, you didn't necessarily like pick them where you had planned, I want to do this career by the time I'm done. Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, because it's like, well, what would I think through with a career? The only thing anybody had ever told me is, you can do whatever you want. I was like, okay, but that's a lot of choices. Like,
it's in project management, you hear this a lot. Not that I was a project manager, but project managers would talk about this. Like, you want to give, or a boss or manager in general, if you give somebody a blank piece of paper and you tell them, come up with an idea for me.
Oh, yes.
And here's a blank piece of paper, start writing.
Yep.
People will freeze. But if you give them like an outline of something and they're like, hey, can you figure out how we can maybe pivot this idea? Here's the idea. Here's one idea. Can you pivot into something else? People are significantly better and will work much faster at that than a blank slate. So this idea of like, you're trying to pick out your future and you're trying to figure out what you want to do with yourself, it's intimidating. It's hard. And you're trying to make a decision for what could possibly be the rest of your life, which it never is, because if you hate a career, you can always change it. But when you're a kid, you don't know that.
Oh, yeah.
You think, if I get a 4-year degree in this and I don't use that 4-year degree, then I just wasted all this money and it was such a bad decision. And nowadays, too, how college has become such a... College isn't always the best decision. And financially now, with student loans being what they are and the amount that college tuition is going up compared to income for kids post-college is not correlating very well. So, yeah, it is...
Well, to be fair, a lot of people do get stuff like English degrees.
They do.
And there's nothing more fun than getting paid not all that much to write someone else's idea. Like, that was worse than programming. That was soul crushing.
Yeah, that one could be bad.
Yeah.
So for you then, do you feel like was there a point for you in your childhood that mental health kind of became more of an apparent thing and became more of a forefront issue, or was it maybe like more in your adult life that became more of a forefront?
So I would say it was always kind of a little bit of a through line. I mean, in part, there was always so much pressure to do well, combined with the fact that, like, my friend group got broken up by changing schools and things like that, and I just wasn't really interacting with people. All I can say is staying home and playing video games all day is not conducive to good mental health. But, I would never say it was incredibly bad in the sense of, like, there are people who are definitely much worse off, right? But definitely overall my mental health was like below the board, if that makes sense, for a very long time. But
do you remember when that became like a thought? Like, was it in middle school that you really became aware of that? Like, oh man, like when I look at other kids, I see in them what I think might be better mental health than myself. And you kind of, because at one point you obviously labeled yourself as below board mental health wise. So what do you kind of remember when that happened?
Probably late high school.
Okay.
Mostly because high school was a mess and not a ton of people were at a point where I would say they were above board, before then. But I would say probably it was when other people started like figuring out their life, dating, doing more stuff like that, where it was like, all right, I still don't have a bunch of close friends and I don't know what I want to do. So I was sitting there and I was like, all right, why is that happening? And I could recognize that, my social skills were not great. Definitely not great. But at the same time, it was like, all right, that's not good. What do I do about this?
Was it like were you playing a game of comparison a lot in high school then?
Yeah, I would say so.
Okay.
I mean, part of it was that, like, my little brother is like 6'1". So, and one of the things, like, being kind of a little bit self-conscious about yourself is another thing. I mean, everybody is, but very much like, well, I suppose everybody is, or they've got an unrealistic picture of themselves. But
I think everybody's self-conscious. I think some people are self-conscious about things that are more apparent to others.
Yeah.
Like a height discrepancy is something that people can see. Some people are self-conscious about things that nobody will see them walking around, maybe once they get to know them. But so I think that's a good point.
And even with like that sort of self-consciousness, it's never been about necessarily what other people think.
Okay.
But it's more about like my own perfectionism, where it's like, and I mean, part of it also is that Ty's like 6'1". My mom's entire side of the family is like super tall. And thankfully, I inherited my grandfather's hair on that side of the family, which is nice. But, so hopefully I'll just, get the salt and pepper soon. But on the other hand, I am not 6'1". And my parents were convinced that I was going to be because, Ty was shooting up and generally they would grow later in, childhood. So I can still wear clothes they bought me from middle school. Like I was running around with very large clothes. It looked like hand-me-downs, despite the fact that I'm the oldest. So it always kind of built the impression that I should be taller, and that it was like, this isn't good. How do I improve my grade on this?
So it wasn't that you cared what other people thought, just that you felt like you weren't hitting a mark that you thought you should be hitting.
Oh, absolutely.
Not based on others' assumptions.
Yeah.
But you still got this thought that you should be taller from somewhere.
Yeah. Well, it's I mean, for that, it was kind of they explicitly told me that I was going to be tall. Like, it's like, okay, yeah. I'm
giving you the hope. And
yeah, I'm like 6. And they're like, well, we should get him big clothes because he's going to end up growing into them. And it was like, okay, well, I can still wear middle school clothes. I think I still got like an old shirt around somewhere. And it's like, oh, this is kind of baggy on me. So it's like, okay, I understand why this is here. But I very much, if there's any issue that I have when it comes to like self-confidence, it's that I very much, people will say, but Jay, you're great. And I'm like, but I could be better. I can see places where I could improve. And that's great when it's something that you can improve. When it's like, could I eat enough steaks to grow taller? And it's like, you can grow wider by eating steaks. But,
so have you like learned to deal with that better as you got older? Where like maybe it sounds like in high school you would think what can I do to be taller? Is that something like nowadays you look at it and you're like, well, no, like my height is my height. It's part of who I am. It's not like it's something like, or do you still kind of look at it as something like I can't change, but I still kind of.
It definitely shows up sometimes.
Okay.
But for me, a large amount of, I mean, really everything is, okay, cool. You're depressed. You're not, doing well. You're not happy with what you're doing. Okay, but what are you going to do about that? So in this case, it's like, all right, might be self-conscious about my height. All right, go. What's something else you can improve? It's okay that you feel that way, but what's something else you can do while in the meantime? Just not being static, because I very much spent a lot of time in high school just being static and playing video games, and that's not a place I want to go back to. So, I can feel how I want about something, but what am I doing in the meantime? And that has been very useful for actually making those things not be as much of a thing.
So do you find yourself, if you're in a situation and this is an issue, I've recognized a problem, it is a problem, you more often than not will take action?
I would say so.
Okay, like you're not somebody to complain and then not take action.
At the very least now.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so you've progressed into that.
Yeah, it took a long time. But I'm here at the gym. I've been going to the gym for like 2 years now, 3 years now. I don't know exactly how long it's been. But like I spent a long time wanting to be, more muscular and stronger. And, it's just at some point I was just like, all right, you know what? Ian keeps talking about this gym. I'm just going to go in. And I think that was like immediately after COVID lockdown. Or maybe it was slightly before. Anyway, but it was around then, and it was just like, all right, I've already started at that point. I'd already gone back to get my psych degree, and I was like, all right, let's just keep going. Let's just find something else to do. And I've just tried to not let that momentum slide since. Okay,
so from high school, like post high school, then you kind of had that some recognition of mental health. Mm-hmm. What are like some big events or big like turning points for you as you kind of develop more and more of that awareness? And you're a perfectionist, so I'm assuming you kind of have an idea, like this is where some mental health ideal that I'm trying to work towards someday, so that when a bad situation happens, I know I'm going to always mentally handle it the same because I have my mental health under control, that I know I'm not on the wrong stressful day, I'm going to lose my shit when something snaps. Instead, I know that even on the worst day, I have enough control to not let myself snap and to let myself stay in an emotionally stable place to make logical decisions and reasonable decisions on things. When do you feel like there was like more events and things that happened in like say like early 20s that kind of defined that more for you and taught you more?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I made some good friends in college, and that was very helpful for just starting to get the ball rolling on everything. Because as soon as there was some improvement, even just, you know, going out, talking to people, hanging out with people regularly, that was, I mean, once you've got momentum, you want to keep moving. And in terms of like specific events, I mean, I feel like everyone finds it motivating to try to impress a girl, right? Yeah. And so that was another big thing to like get into the gym and things like that, to just try to improve yourself. In terms of like mental health goals, I don't know if I say I have goals necessarily for my mental health so much as I have goals for how I handle things. Because like, I don't know what I should feel like when I'm, doing fine. And I don't really know if I want to focus on how I feel, how I should feel. Because I know that perfectionism is a tempting thing.
Yeah.
And I don't really want to like be sitting there being a perfectionist for like, I need to be happy at all times. Because this is, no. I'm not going there. I know where this ends. But I'd much rather sit there and it's like, all right, if something goes wrong, how do I handle it? Is there a, kind of mindset that I can adopt that will help me deal with things? And just trying to be constructive about that. So I'm not necessarily tracking how I'm feeling so much as how I'm responding to things. And that's definitely helped. Like, again, I work with autistic kids. There's a lot that will challenge you doing that, and there's a lot that will test your patience. And I mean, one, that's been very good for practicing skills, but I've also never really gotten angry at a client. That's always been something I'm very, very good at handling, just being like, all right, not relevant. Let's stick it in the little nothing box and we'll just keep moving. Because it's like, okay, this person's not deliberately taking actions against you. And that's generally how I approach people being inconvenient. It's like, all right, if somebody is deliberately lying to me, I feel totally justified being as angry and, I wouldn't say spiteful, but, I'm definitely not going to be sympathetic to a lot of your, excuses if you were deliberately lying to me. If I can sit there and be like, all right, I understand why this is happening. Even if you're lying to me deliberately because it's like you're ashamed of this or something like that. It's like, okay, I get that. Yeah, I might be irritated, but being irritated is very different from being angry, if that makes sense.
It does. Do you find, like, are you generally an empathetic person? Like, you find it easy to maybe see people's emotions or no? Because, like, it's one thing to identify emotions, and even just like from a clinical point of view, you can see somebody say they're anxious or depressed.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a little different to say like I can almost feel the emotion when I see look at somebody.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you get that at all or no?
So I feel like I need to split that into two different things.
Okay.
Like that statement of I can feel the emotion when I look at somebody. No, not at all. I can sit there and work with people who are utterly miserable, and I can want to help them, and I can spend a lot of time helping them and really like give my all with that. And then I'll go home and make a pizza. And it's just like, okay, it's fine. I can see the emotions in other people, but that's like, I did not have good social skills growing up. Like I always tell people, I learned social skills by watching Castle. And that explains a hell of a lot about how I interact with people. But, I very much am like, okay, I know I'm bad at social skills. So let's look at people, like what's going on. And I'm sure, there's a lot of people at the gym who know that as soon as I'm distracted and talking about something, a lot of the paying attention to social cues goes out the window. But when I'm actually talking to someone one-on-one and it's, a conversation, not me ranting about some sort of hobby I have, I'm very deliberately trying to pay attention to things because I know that it's not my natural inclination to do. So am I an empathetic person? I wouldn't say naturally, but I mean, you can make your empathy's a skill, just like anything else.
Yeah, yeah.
I feel like to a degree, if you're somebody who works in any field that involves dealing with other people, and you say, "Well, I'm just not an empathetic person," it's like, all right, but then you're not really doing your due diligence here to actually gain the skills for your job. I mean, you might still make it work. You don't need to have empathy. I mean,
But you can argue that it helps.
it helps. Yeah. Alfred Ellis proved that you don't need empathy, or you don't need that sort of emotional empathy to be a therapist, but it may help people not stand up and walk out of your clinic when you tell them, "Why do you think that?"
Yeah. You got to understand a little bit more about how their words are coming from an emotion, not a logical place.
Yeah. Feelings don't care about your facts.
So do you feel like some of this stuff came from, obviously every kid is literally a reflection of their mom and dad and their mom and dad's behaviors to some limit, as well as societal and like what they've picked up in other ways. But a lot of our underlying things really come down to what we saw our parents do, especially those, first 0 to 3 years, and how much their nervous system kind of gets imprinted on you.
Yeah.
So like, how much you see yourself relating to your mom and dad? I mean, obviously I know your dad, and I know you, so I can see some of your relation to your dad and how you guys are similar. I'd like you to talk about that.
Yeah. Similar. We're not similar at all. No. But I definitely can see that. I know some things are maybe the result of when I was born. I don't know how much they'd interacted with children. And I don't know if they see this video, maybe they'll say whether or not they'd ever babysitted or anything like that. But apparently they'd play a game called Jay the Ticking Time Bomb, where they would take me as a baby and put me next to whichever one of them was sleeping. And then my mom had a little song, and I was sitting there and I was like, what game would you play? She went through the entire little song. It lasted about 60 seconds. And I was like, you remember this still. How many times did you do this? And then I'd start crying and wake up the person, and they'd be like, "Oh no, Jay, it's okay, you can sleep." It's like, this may have been important for my development, but apart from the amount of experimentation, I mean, firstborn, the amount of experimentation is always there. But I also definitely have observed people being very technically oriented, very detail oriented, not necessarily super outwardly emotive. I mean, my family's not the most emotive unless we're in a one-on-one, scale.
Like you could elicit emotion out of anybody in your family if I sat there and I talked to them long enough, without a doubt. But when we all sit in a room around each other on a Christmas day, nobody's overly emotive in their how they're acting or being dramatic about anything, or like being extra happy and extra, oh my God. No, everybody's very kind of even-keeled, level-headed.
Oh man, yeah. Every time that happens when I'm around people, I'm always like, what's going on? I don't, where did that come from?
When I came to your, when I started coming to family stuff and I started forcing people to hug me.
Oh, yes.
Like your family didn't know what to do.
Yep.
I'm like, I'm giving you a hug. I'm giving everybody a hug. I don't care.
Yep. My mom's side of the family hugs. And the first time, we went out there, because they're out on the West Coast. First time I went out there and met them, and they were like, "Oh, Jay." And I was like, "What's going on?" I was like 6, and I was like, what are you doing?
Where in the West Coast is your mom's?
Oregon.
Oregon, okay, cool. Yeah,
they're just outside of Portland.
I don't think I knew that.
Yeah,
okay, awesome.
like Corvallis. Okay. Portland is weirder than Portlandia, so it's. But we're not the most outwardly emotionally expressive people. But
so I see in you, obviously, you very much have this character that no matter what, you kind of look at things as, well, no matter what, as much as I want to, you can sit there and sit in that emotion. You want to move forward. You want to figure out how to move forward. You want to figure out how to make things better. That seems to be something very much like instinct in you, because through this entire conversation, it seems like no matter what, there's been awareness, and then with that awareness has come action. You've always tried to take some level of action, or eventually, as you've gotten older here in your 20s, have learned to take more of that action.
What I would say is the big change, because I know we talked about it, was just trying to not be as much of a perfectionist.
Okay.
Because the thing that always was holding me back beforehand was knowing how to fix it, but not knowing the right choice of how to fix it. Because picking out of a vast number of choices has always been a struggle. And so just being like, all right, you know what? I'm going back and getting a psych degree. Is this the right thing? Well, no, I don't know. But I almost did this when I was there the first time. And I ended up getting talked out of it, basically, which for reasons that made sense at the time. I don't know if it would have been the right field for me to be in when I was like 22. You know, I don't know if I would have had enough life experience, talked to enough people. I don't think I would have had a large enough like network to maintain my own philosophy and thought process towards it, which, you know, is important. I shouldn't be going to school and becoming a little clone of my professor. They might be a successful therapist, but that's not me. You know? But so in a lot of ways, I don't really regret needing to go back to school and everything. But very much just, you know, I mean, everybody has moments where it's like, is this the right thing? And earlier I would have not done it because it was like, well, that's not the right choice, which means I need to find something else. And it was always kind of presented to me that it's like, you'll know when you find the right thing. But so far, out of everybody I've ever talked to, only Kirk has ever sat there and been like, I know what I'm going to do with my life. So, I mean, it's awesome that he did that, but I'm just going to have to fight through not knowing if this is the right choice and just seeing if I can make it work, which...
And, you know, even like Kirk says he knows, and I think it's all like, I don't think anybody truly knows. I think Kirk's just been in it long enough that he knows this is like, there's no part of it that he doesn't like, or, you know, like say somebody's in their career for 20 years in, they're like, you know, I can tolerate my career, but I don't necessarily care for it. Where Kirk's like 20 years in, he's like, no, I do like it. I still like working with people. But I don't think it was that came from him knowing. It still came from him just kind of taking a bit of a leap. And it's funny because I think like this perfectionist thing is 100% something I struggle with. And I mean, I think I struggle with it. I think everybody struggles with it. I think the issue is some people struggle with it in a way where we truly want to do the things that we're trying to be perfect about. And a lot of people, maybe if they're perfectionist about something, they just will not even try it. They'll give up. No, I can't do it. I'm a perfectionist. I don't have the skill. Then I won't even try to learn it and pick up this new thing because I just don't have the skill. Where I think it's more important to be a perfectionist and then recognize that like I just have to take the first step. And you learn about like taking that first step, because even like doing this podcast, like I was like I could spend so long getting the perfect equipment, learning how should I make this and structure every episode and make this all perfect so that. But I was like, no, I want to do these conversations. And it literally took me just being like, John, just buy a goddamn set of mics and just sit down with somebody and record a conversation, which is what I did with Justin for the first one. But my mind hated so much of it until I recorded it. Just this idea, like, I should get a better camera. I should get a better setup. I should make sure that we're not in just some random room. I should get a studio. I would all these things. I'm like, I want to be a perfectionist. And I literally never, ever would have started this podcast if I didn't just accept, John, just buy a set of mics and start recording. See what happens and post it. But people never get out of that. So I think it's so important to learn to be a to learn that like it's okay to be a perfectionist as long as you can like step back. And it sounds like that's something you maybe learned in your 20s more than...
I mean, it was one of those things I knew the entire time, but knowing and accepting is not the same thing. People can tell you all you want. You know, you just have to pick something, and it's like, fuck off. I'm doing the perfect thing. But I was reminded of one other thing relating to your earlier question about seeing myself and my parents. One of the things that I find the most fascinating about it is that when it comes to like relationships and things, my parents don't really talk to one another in front of me or even my brother. I've seen them hug once. That's the sort of relationship they have. They do talk a lot, because one of the things I did while I was in college was I'd watch like a TV show with my mom, or I'd watch a TV show with my dad. really that was kind of when I really started getting close to my parents. And we'd watch something, and then the other one would know about it. And I'd never seen them talk, but then they started going out on dates. They did a fantastic job just like communicating about like their own relationship issues, things like that. They found solutions. They just decided to go out to eat and go on little dates with just them, multiple times a week, just because they were like, okay, well, we want to feel closer. But I have never seen them really have an emotional conversation with one another. It's all something that happens behind closed doors. And I can very much see that in terms of, I'm a pretty open guy. Put me in a room with 4 people, and I'm not a very open guy. Put me here, and I can talk just fine.
What's like for your parents? Your mom came from a family that was huggers. So like,
oh yes.
What's your opinion about, obviously your dad's side of the family isn't, so your mom's side of the family was. Why do you think they kind of didn't? I would have guessed your mom would have tried to maybe force more emotional conversations, because I could see your dad not wanting to have an emotional conversation, but your mom being like, no, like, we'll talk about some stuff, like we'll bring it up. Or
I feel like they compromised by just being like, all right, you don't want to have these conversations in a public place. We have plenty of time to talk in a way that isn't in front of kids. And so they can go do that. It's one of those things that I kind of recognize now, not growing up. Growing up, I just was like, okay, these are my parents. I'm not really going to question it. And it'd be weird when you like would go over to a friend's house and their parents would like, oh, I'm heading out, honey. And she'd give her husband a kiss on the cheek and leave. And I would be like, I was very open. When it's like, that's kind of normal.
What do you think, do you think that people view relationships with the opposite sex based off their own parents' relationship? That's kind of the first relationship we see, the biggest one that gets imprinted on us.
Yeah.
Do you think people do you think people assume that their parents' marriage, do you think everybody wants to have a different marriage than their parents had when they meet a significant other? Do you think that can vary depending on what kind of marriage their parents had? Part of me wants to say that I would guess a lot of kids want to do different than their parents because they think they could do better or whatever.
Yeah. So I feel like there's 2 very different sides to that depending on how someone's childhood went. Like if you had a miserable childhood with parents who, didn't do the things that they needed to do, I can, you going, I want to have a different marriage to my parents is probably a good thing, if they did not fulfill, some of the things that they're supposed to be doing. If they did do a good job, I think the healthy thing is to say, I want that, but I want to polish it up a little bit. Like going back to the perfectionism thing, it's not about doing perfect, it's about doing better. And so looking there, it's like, all right, if I was looking at, the kind of marriage I'd want to have, no, I don't want to be talking about emotional stuff in front of my kids because, I want them to know what's going on and know that, see healthy examples of how to navigate it. But if it's something that's not going to be constructive for the kids, by all means, have that conversation away from them. It's the same thing as when you're talking to kids about what you're going to do and say, I disagree with something that my wife has said, or she disagrees with something I said, I'm probably not going to just contradict them in front of the kids. I'm going to be like, yeah, okay, that's an idea. And then we'll talk about it later. And when we come back, and if we've decided something different, we'll come back and say, oh, you know what? We changed our minds here because it's we should be kind of presenting as a united front that talks to one another, that sort of thing. So the only thing I'd really add is a little bit more, obvious emotional intimacy in front of kids, just so they get more of an example of that.
Well, you talked a lot about a lot of things, being emotional in front of your kids, in a marriage, you obviously don't want to fight. You obviously don't want to argue. If there's something actually wrong and it's more of an adult conversation, you definitely don't want to have it in front of the kids. But what do you think about the opposite side of positive emotions? Where do you think your parents, do you wish, or do you think at all that that your dad could have showed more positive emotion? Or do you never feel like that was something you want, like you desire to see out of him? Like,
I mean, it's one of those things where, I mean, maybe this is just me, but I feel like I do see a lot of positive emotion about him. But also that's just because we're all pretty subtle, and that's just how we communicate.
you understand your dad's.
Yeah.
When your dad is positively emotional, you know it, compared to where somebody else might be like, oh, he doesn't seem like he's showing much emotion. You're like, no, my dad's very happy right now.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're sitting there and you give him a Christmas gift, and he opens it and he's completely silent and he's looking at it and he's like, oh. That is like the best response, because it's like, I could sit there and be like, thank you, but this is distracting. This is cool.
I can see your dad in some past Christmases now. Like the gifts he's liked, he's like, oh wow, this is all like he does show it.
Yeah, and it's like this is really open, but you know, it doesn't need to necessarily be loud. At the same time, like, when it comes to open displays of emotion, I think the more useful thing is just more of like showing kids how to interact with other people. Like, I definitely did not learn how to interact with the opposite sex from my parents, because they handle all of that behind closed doors.
Okay.
Again, I've seen them hug once, and as soon as I rounded that corner, they immediately let go of one another, and we're now standing like 3 feet apart again. And I was amused by it, but you know, it's that sort of thing. It's like I've figured out my own strategies, but at the same time, I've pretty much figured out my own strategies through trial and error, and having some degree of a guide here might have been helpful.
Did you watch a lot of TV when you were younger?
I watched a decent amount.
Okay. Kearney, that's one thing, like, big difference when we talk about our childhoods. She really didn't sound like she watched much TV. Like, they really did not put on the TV very often. They maybe watched like a movie at night as a family, but like she would not watch like sitcoms like the way I grew up watching. Like, and I say this because there's so many interactions I think you learn from your parents, but I also feel like anything I didn't see in my parents that I wanted, I learned to pick up the things I wanted that I didn't see my parents from watching TV.
Yeah.
And then almost like learning how to, maybe I would interact with women or the opposite sex, or even with friends or teachers or whatever. I'd almost like pick up these interactions from watching TV.
Yeah.
Because I didn't see my parents have those direct interactions, especially because maybe I had like a less stereotypical upbringing of like not less American upbringing that to try to then interact and live a teenage American life. I didn't have like this history to pull back on, and even questions of my parents to ask them about, where I did rely on like the sitcoms I watched and the TV I watched, and how much that related to the social life I lived around me.
Yeah.
How was that effect for you?
So it's interesting that you say that, because I definitely watched more TV than Kearney. I'm not a big movie person. So it's like,
I mean, I love movies too. When I was a kid, I watched TV and movies all the time when I was a kid.
But I never watched sitcoms.
Okay.
To me, I need a plot. And like, I can watch an episode of Seinfeld and it's like, cool, that was fun. Do you want to watch the next episode? I mean, I don't know if you want to watch the next episode. I can enjoy it, but there's nothing that makes me want to watch the next episode. So that's why I joke that I learned social skills from Castle. Like, I watched a lot of cop shows growing up, because there was, you knew kind of the arc that each episode was going to have a plot that would attract you to it. Like, the most pivotal shows growing up were with things like Justice League and Avatar: The Last Airbender, right? It's because they had their daily episodes, but then they also had a strong plot that made you go, but what happens next? But none of those shows really focus on like the simple day-to-day social dynamics. So I don't think it helped me as much as like it might have helped you, in terms of just like getting normal examples of what things are kind of supposed to be like.
I don't even know if I would say it helped as much as maybe it almost set unrealistic expectations of, I need to join the football team to be a football star to get more girls to talk to me, Like, it was almost negative in that sense, because I would watch a TV show where the football star got the high school varsity cheerleaders talking, So it was not necessarily an overly positive example. It was almost some of the negative expectations of society that puts out. Yeah. It got translated through that a lot.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So then, okay, so like Castle, you watched that in high school, or?
It was like high school. Late high school probably. I'm trying to remember the exact years here. The first 3 seasons.
Okay.
We don't talk about it after the writer's strike. But those first 3 seasons, that was probably like really when I sat down to like actually going, all right, I have terrible social skills. What can I do about this to improve? Where's something that I can start trying to pick things up? Like I've always taken the stance of like, if something's too big of a hill to, climb, let's break it up into smaller chunks. Like just, all right, here's Castle. Let's just watch it. And how does the main character like talk to people? Does he tease them? Like what sort of things like that? Okay, I'm already kind of sarcastic. I already like to tease people. I'm an older brother. I can be pretty savage. So it's like, how can I incorporate this in a way that's useful for social interaction? It's not necessarily good for, making friends out of the blue. Although from my experience, the best way to make friends is just treat people as if they already are. And then you just kind of Stockholm syndrome them into being your friend. But just kind of focusing on that, like how do people carry themselves? How do people talk?
Do you feel like you're like this idea that you think like you have bad social skills? Does that just come from you feeling like you were trying to fit into how other people acted? Because like I don't necessarily think you lack social skills. So when you say you lack social skills, I wonder, does that come from a place of like it's different than that? Because you don't necessarily care what people think either.
Yeah.
But then you kind of maybe are putting yourself in a box of I should be able to behave this way, or I should be able to pick up on this cue that other people picked up on. But I don't necessarily even see you lacking on the ability to pick up a cue as much as just it's personality differences, right?
Yeah. It is like one of the things that I noticed early on when I was in high school was that I got along generally better with the students from like India or Pakistan and the students from like the foreign exchange students from Hong Kong. And that just felt like a little bit, I mean, my parents definitely, they don't necessarily think about face, but like that concept of like you kind of representing people and your family was something that just is like, oh, that makes sense. And, having a little bit more of that, I don't know, countenance maybe, was something that fit better. But at the same time, I was also very aware that like, I didn't, when I say I didn't have social skills, I mean, I did not have great social skills at the time. I've gotten a lot better and just gotten more used to social interaction. So it was one of those things where it's like, okay, personality differences, yes, but like, I also should try to meet people halfway because I can't expect somebody else just to get my personality. And if a lot of the students that I'm interacting with think I'm kind of weird and strange, like that's like, I don't care that they think I'm odd, but at the same time, I should try to meet them halfway because this is something that could be a problem later on.
Yeah, because like you don't want to be a lone wolf who says if nobody gets along with my personality, I'm never going to put in an effort to get along with anybody.
Yeah, it's like, cool, I can keep my personality, but like, okay, I'd like to have more friends. So what's the first step? Well, I can sit here and be like, well, people need to meet me. And it's like, okay, but I can't demand that people meet me if I'm not going to try to meet them, right?
Yeah. It's interesting because I think like the high school insecurity that you will have in high school, you basically carry for the rest of your life. Even if you've dealt with the thing that was insecure, it still becomes like a little bit of a crutch. So, for you, like it sounds like you felt like you lacked social skills, and even if like now the Jay I know is a Jay, I think your social skills are better. I obviously didn't know you in high school. They're probably much worse. I probably would have told you, oh yeah, you were.
Yes. Believe me, they were worse.
But so like now it's obvious. It still becomes a thing that's you're gonna always kind of default to or think back on, or almost like your brain wants to think of it as like this is a default character trait of mine. I have bad social skills, even as much as you've progressed and gone through it.
Yeah.
What do you think, like, do you think there's any solution to that? Because I think like you get so many kids where high school could be like a traumatic like experience, and not traumatic as in like it's literally traumatic, but like it was a struggle socially. It was a struggle. Maybe they wanted more friends, they didn't get more friends. But a lot of people like that end up honestly doing fine when they're adults. It's just how often I feel like people in their adults wish they could go back to their high school stuff and be like, dude. Like, don't stress about that stuff. I know I can't tell you not to, but at the same time, I wish I could just tell you not to stress about the stuff that you're stressing about, because so many things equalize when you're an adult. So many things equalize when you're just somebody who walks into a room and nobody knows anybody, because there isn't middle school and high school years of experience and social life to talk, adds context to every single thing that's happening. Instead, it's, nope, I'm just an adult walking into a room with other adults, and I don't give a shit how popular or not popular we're in high school. Can you do the thing that we're all here to do? Or do we all get along? Is there peace between us? Great. That's all that matters, What's it like, kind of what's your opinion on how people like deal with that, and like with your own experience of growing from that?
Yeah, I think that you'll probably always have it there, but the goal is for having it not be impacting your functioning. Like, I can sit there and think, I don't have great social skills. And if that motivates me to pay attention to people, and that gives me good social skills, then it doesn't really matter if I think that, as long as it's not actually holding me back and it's not something that's weighing me down.
Okay.
Like I take a very functional approach to it.
Yeah.
Right? I don't care that this is happening because, what is it? There's an old like Buddhist proverb of 3 monks who all are in chronic pain. One says, I refuse to accept this pain, and he's miserable because he's in pain. The other one says, I accept this pain, and then he screams at the heavens because he's like, I accepted it. Why won't you take it away? And he's in pain. And the last monk says, I accept this pain, and he just was in pain for the rest of his life. But he'd accepted it. And it's like, all right, I don't have social skills. If I can get to the point where I'm like, okay, whatever, I don't have great social skills, and here are the things I'm doing to, fix it. It doesn't really matter, as long as it's not something that I'm feeling down about, and it's not something that actually matters or poses an obstacle in my life. I'm not going to continue to try to strive for perfection, like even to a degree mentally, because it's like, we're going to be here all day, and past a certain point, you just need to live your life. So I feel like people doing that is how you end up going to the same therapist for like 10 years. Because it's like, there's always something else that I could do to work on. And it's like, okay, but are you good enough? Because nobody's perfect. Are you functional? Are you happy? Not necessarily all the time, but are you happy most of the time? You can still sit there and be like, oh, goddamn, that was some bad social skills right there, when you like get distracted or something. But is it going to be something that weighs you down? If it's not something that weighs you down, just move on, and it's good.
So a lot of it kind of started for you, and you think it should start for people with acceptance, like a certain level there, like accepting yourself for who you are and the way you are, and even if you you have a fault, recognizes that fault, but like don't think I have to change. I can change. I can work to change, but I don't. It's not having to change doesn't become this like.
Yeah, I want to change.
Yeah,
I don't need to, and that if I need to change, and there's a whole bunch of other stuff that I need to do, well, all of a sudden, anytime those things brush up against one another, you're stuck. As opposed to, I want to change. I want to have better social skills. What am I willing to give up? Oh, do I sit at home and play video games all the time? Well, I can probably get better social skills if I stop doing that. So I don't need to do either one, but I want social skills more. This is now a thing that I can choose to do.
Okay. So, kind of like to wrap all this up. Accept. I really like this idea of acceptance. I think is so huge, and it's one I've talked about in the past, and I feel like there's so much more to talk about with it. But acceptance sounds like a verb, right? To accept.
Yeah.
But how do you attach actionable tips to that? How do you tell somebody like, well, like you have to accept this thing, but obviously, it's like telling like just do it. Well, you can't just do it. Where do you think you would start with telling somebody to learn to accept, and what are actionable steps you think somebody could take, or maybe ones that you've taken yourself?
I think the biggest thing is to break it down. So if somebody is sitting there and they're like, I'm not attractive because I'm short or whatever. Well, probably it's not just that you're sitting there and it's like, I'm not attractive because I'm short. Now, you might not be taking any care of your appearance because you feel like you're not attractive because you're short, but it'd be like, all right, your premise is that you're not attractive. So what are some things that you can do that would increase your attractiveness? And you can sit there and be like, but I'm short and no one cares. And it's like, well, start moving on that, on some other aspect, because that may still be there. And you might still think, well, I'm short. I mean, I am. But, it's one of those things where, all right, I'll take a little bit more pride in my appearance. How am I going to dress? Well, I can, wear a flannel all the time, like a standard issue white guy. But, whatever. It looks fine, so I'm not going to worry about it too much. Besides, it's kind of unique because I don't see anybody doing it. It's too boring and normal for everyone to do, so now it's unique. But just what looks good? Do a little bit of research into how you can dress. How can you style your beard? How can you, go get a haircut? Just things like that. Go to the gym, work on your weight, work on, stuff like that. If you want to be attractive, a lot of people find somebody who's making money and has a career attractive. So make it stable. Just work on all those other aspects of the thing you're worried about. And eventually you're going to have evidence that's like, okay, maybe this thing didn't matter as much. I might still worry about it, but I also have direct evidence that it didn't matter.
So acceptance is actually, what you're saying is it's not the egg before the chicken. The chicken almost has to come before the egg because you have had to have done some work to learn that maybe I have this one quality that's bad, but I can put in all this work on the things I can't control.
Yeah.
And once you learn that there's other things you can't control, that's when the acceptance set in for you?
To me, acceptance is born out of momentum. You can't accept things when you're static.
Okay.
Sitting down and saying, I've done nothing, but I accept this. It's like, that's not how it works, because you're not changing anything about your life. You need to be changing in order to change something about how your views are.
Yeah.
So it's, you can go on, TikTok or whatever and, try to accept stuff about yourself, but I don't think that's going to work. At least not really. You're going to need to find something to change about your life. It might not even be something that's related. But just pick something where you can look at it and say, I improved my life. And I did something that changes, even if it's just a tiny bit, how the thing that I'm self-conscious about might be perceived. And that's going to be the big helper, I guess.
Action causes momentum, and momentum will eventually lead to acceptance, and probably leads into more momentum and more acceptance.
Yeah.
So it's very much just active effort.
Yeah.
Right? That's all, and I'm guessing you would agree it's a non-stop active effort. It doesn't really ever go away. Yeah. If you want to continue to accept and learn to continue accepting this thing. Because would you agree that if once that effort goes away, maybe the action stops, your acceptance will probably go back and you'll unaccept something to, you know what I mean?
I don't know if it would ever go back to where you were, but I could definitely see it becoming a problem again.
Slip back a little bit at least. Yeah. Okay.
It's, I mean, part of it is, part of my own philosophy is how I've kind of dealt with my own perfectionism, where it's I no longer aim to do the perfect thing. I aim to do better than the last time every single time I try. So that, leads to, the acceptance, and coming from movement, right? Because, if you're trying to do it better than every time you try, that inherently requires you to try again.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But if you are somebody who's static, that's my thought process there is that's why you need to break down the problem. If you're sitting there and it's I'm not attracted because of my height. Okay, let's break down those two statements, because those are two separate things. There's a lot of things people find attractive. So if you're saying a blanket statement, I'm not attractive, and your height is a portion of that, it's the part that you're probably focusing on. But that initial statement might be able to be broken down into 5 or 6 different things, and it could be as simple as go shave.
So it's that realization that how much a statement can over encompass too many things,
Yeah.
but you attach to it so much.
Yeah.
But you break it apart and you're like, well, okay, there's one little part of it. And again, it goes back to there's other aspects I can't control and an aspect I can't control. I can shave my face. I can wear something a little nicer. I can make sure my hair gets done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But only shave if your face looks good without a beard. Otherwise, just, style it.
Otherwise, it's baby face.
Yes. Yeah. On the other hand, we'll be the ones laughing in like 20 years. We'll just be able to take 15 years off just by shaving.
I know, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably not, because then I'm going to have this funky tan line there in my face too.
For a little bit. A little bit.
Yeah.
But
no, that's great. I mean, I think that's great advice. And I think that's advice that a lot of people could use and feed into, because acceptance is definitely, it's a word that could get thrown around, but what does it mean? How do you start to accept? And I think what you just said there is great. Action leading to momentum, and the momentum is what's going to lead you to that acceptance ultimately. I think that's such a great statement. That's such a great thing that a lot of people could really apply to their lives. Well, thank you so much for being on the episode today. This was a great conversation, and it was great to kind of hear a little bit more about your own struggle and your own journeys that you've gone through. And obviously, I see in front of me here a man who's obviously, like, you've done some work, and I see a lot of polished upness about you that obviously I didn't know you in high school. So I can't compare completely, but it's great to hear that you have done a lot of this work. And from what I know about you, I've seen you change even just a short period I've seen you.
Thank you.
I've known you. You've improved, and you continue to get better. So this is a great journey. And thank you again for being on.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of Unturned Stones. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe. Otherwise, thank you and have a great rest of your day.
Have a nice day, guys.
Awesome. Well, thank you, sir. I appreciate you being on this.
Yeah.
Yeah.